So I've kind of mentioned before, sort of as a complaint, but complaint's a lousy choice of words, but let's call it a complaint for lack of a better term. There are people out there that have been doing this a whole lot longer than I have that have gotten so accustomed to their echo chamber of conversation around, their students that have followed them up through the ranks, that they don't go back to the beginning and explain things in a more rudimentary fashion. And that's okay, I get it. They have their audience, and I'm not criticizing them. These are super smart guys, and they're the guys I get a lot of my good information from. And they number in the many out there. But I've often said that somebody needs to kind of back up and start in a more rudimentary fashion. So when you're talking about currency debasement, which is an ongoing problem with currency, it's just built-in factor of currency. People will often say things like, well, your dollars lose value, or your purchasing power is another term, and they're all trying to be helpful, and they're all basically saying the same thing. But I like analogies better, because those terms, people sort of have their own, there's no fixed definition for what they're saying necessarily, at least in the mind of the people, the listeners. They don't see it that way. And there's no dictionary you can go look this stuff up in and get a clear answer. Well, maybe there is, but people don't do that, So I'd like to explain it a different way. So the reason for honing hard, eventually their conclusion is buy hard assets like gold and silver, or land, or Bitcoin, or whatever, any kind of hard assets. Heck, it could be honey or tools or stuff like that, but they all have problems over time, like things rust and things go bad and spoil. Like if you can store food permanently, well, that's a good commodity. Like if we're storing gold and silver, we can't eat them, you can't live in them, so you would use them later to buy real things you need. The gold helps you just over time avoid the currency debasement, so you can get the same amount of goods later on, because you can't with currency. That's the whole thing. That's what devaluation is and loss of purchasing power looks like. So we have to talk about the things that it looks like. So the reason we always say hard assets is basically, think of it like a photocopier. If you walked up to me and said, I need $20, and I said, well, I only got a 10. Well, I'll tell you what, I'll just go over to the photocopier here and we'll just copy it and give you that. You'd be like, I'm not taking that. You'd be crazy. So why is that? Why do we have a natural instinct to know? I mean, what's the difference? What's the difference between the photocopy and the original? They have no value of their own, right? It's just that the second one doesn't have the trust of the government. It's a copy. It has the same serial number on it, so it's a fraud. But in a sense, they're both kind of a fraud. I don't want to go too far with saying currency is a fraud. That's an overstatement, but in a sense, because they're able to be copied like that, and adding new currency to the system is basically no different than taking a photocopy. It really isn't. I mean, money printing for the sake of, not for, account. I've talked in the past about banking is just accounting. So when money is issued for a project, company goes for a loan, they want to build something and build a building or build a business or whatever. The currency is there to just facilitate the transactions, right? It's just an accounting system. So if we facilitate more currency than's needed for the transaction, it debases the value of all that currency. It's all affected by it. So what we want to do is we want to own things that can't be duplicated, thrown into a photocopier. You can't photocopy gold. You can't photocopy honey. You can't photocopy ammunition. You can't photocopy houses, right? These things have to be built, right, with real work effort. And then the currency is just there to account for it. So owning hard assets, that's really the way to look at it, to get down to the simplicity of it, where these other people having the conversation are using terminology that may or may not be interpreted properly by you or others. We need to get down to analogy and like simple examples like that. So think of it that way. Think of it as things that can't be copied. You'd be ticked off if somebody copied a 10 for you. How ticked off would you be if I could, but you can't. You simply can't copy a silver coin or a gold coin. You can create fakes, but that's a whole different subject matter. Fact is, hard assets win in these currency debasement times like we're going through right now. And currency debasement is not something you can see, smell, or touch or notice with your five senses. And most of us operate in our five senses most of the time. So I'm always trying to get people out of that ethereal conceptual conversation into the more substantial, because that's where most of us live. Most of us ordinary working class and middle class people work with their hands and do things and think in terms of real things. So we have to be careful how we explain these things. So think of it that way, folks. Things that can't be copied, because right now we're going through a massive currency debasement, and you know, depending on what assets you hold, you know, and well, not just things that can't be debased, because some of those are being debased in terms of their dollar value, but that's another topic that gets really heady, so we won't go there right now. Just take it from, you know, anybody, anytime you hear any, like, I'm not saying you only have to listen to me, that's the other thing. I mean, but when you're listening to these more high level guys, because they all have great things to say, when you hear purchasing power, when you hear currency debasement, you hear, you know, all of that loss of value, it really just is a signal to say, own hard assets because they can't be copied. That's it. Own hard assets because they can't be copied. You need a mantra to carry around in your back pocket. That's it. You need to own hard assets because they can't be copied. Over and out.